Our presenters will compare results through analysis of 6 years worth of SAAL MOOC data from our traditional null hypothesis significant testing, NHST, to results obtained with analysis through observation-oriented modeling, OOM. OOM effectively compensates for small sample sizes by concentrating on meaningful, person-centered, and relatively assumption-free analysis, as opposed to depending on dubious assumptions that are rarely met in practice and the computation of the probability values from analysis. Our desired outcome for today's presentation is to identify some analysis or reporting challenges in our assessment work, distinguish traditional null hypothesis significant testing and more recent OOM, and weigh the option of performing OOM analysis in our own data sets. And without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Wu and Dr. Nix. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, John. And let me share my screen right now. Can you all see my slides okay? Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us today. I'm Sarah Wu, Assistant Director of Assessment at Georgia Tech. My background is in social psychology, and I have been working in the assessment field for more than 10 years now, and that includes academic assessment, student affairs assessment, and many large-scale institutional-wide assessment projects. I have this great opportunity to work with Dr. Nix on this project, and I reflected a lot on what I have been using and what I have learned. Now, Dr. Nix, would you like to introduce yourself too?
Sure. Thank you, Sarah. And it's my pleasure to be working with Dr. Wu here and to be in front of y'all. It's a big group. Thank you for joining today. My background is in assessment, sort of. Assessment kind of evolved as I was supervising those who assessed, but I've been in evaluation and in a global manufacturing setting for a dozen years before the advent of assessment in higher ed became what we know it is today. And I worked in student affairs as an administrator for about 20 years. I've served as a VP and a interim president too. But for the last 5 years, I've been tenure track faculty. I am currently a research methodologist for a doctoral program. And so this is how I got interested and learned about OOM, helping students analyze their data sets. So again, it's great to be here. Thank you. Back to you, Sarah.
Yeah, so through this structured conversation, we hope you will be able to identify some challenges in your assessment work, specifically in analysis or reporting. And we hope you will be able to distinguish the traditional null hypothesis significant testing like t-test, ANOVA, and the observation-oriented modeling that is our focus today. And also, we hope you can weigh the option of performing this OOM on your own data sets. So I really like to us maybe start to imagine this, and this actually happens to me very often, either for academic program or student support service assessment. So you your response rate from your survey data is really low, like 10, 12, 15%. And you love your students so much. You want to make sure every groups of your students are successful. So you disaggregate the data by race, gender, or any other types of variables. However, the result is not significant. But you also continue to see some groups of students are always having this lower in performance scores comparing to other groups of students. And because it is not significant in my t-test results, for example, so it is so hard for me to put the results into this one-page highlight for senior leadership, especially when we want to create some action plan based on data. So what I usually use for determining if a difference exists between scores of different groups is from my traditional statistical training. So that is based on null-hypothesis significant testing. And it is testing against a hypothesis of no effect or no relationships. But if you really go deeper and understand the whole concept of each testing, it is actually centered around variables, means, variances that actually often exists only in the theory. And it really relies heavily on random sampling. It requires you to test your data distribution. Is it normal curve or not? But when you run your data, most likely those testing are sacrificing your outliers. So what if the groups you care so much are the outliers? So this is really, when I work on this project, this is something that I keep reflecting on what I've been using and on my own data. So you may know this joke. So a farmer has some chickens who don't lay any eggs. The farmer calls the theoretical physics to help. The physicist does some calculations and says, I have a solution, but it only works for spherical chickens in a vacuum. So those testing really live in theory and have many hypotheses your data has to meet those standards. But if you look at our educational data, we know that we are living in the educational settings. We have so many different feelings towards what we are trying to get, right? There are so many factors play a role here, can make your results not reliable. So every time when you get your data, are you really doing this random sampling when you launch a survey for your population? Did you really test if your data is in the normal distribution when you put all your raw data into SPSS or other, statistical platform? So we have some problems when you apply null-hypothesis significant testing to our educational data. But fortunately, psychologists who deal with the real world, various human behaviors have been confirming that, yeah, there are some limitations and flaws in these methods. Especially in our educational research practices or social science research practices. And not just psychologists and statisticians, other well-known organizations like APA, NIMH, they all recognize this. So this, I have mentioned here. There's another way we can understand and analyze our data. And this new way of thinking is called observation-oriented modeling. And I heard Vince keep saying OM, and finally know the whole words is. It seeks to explain the patterns of our observation. That's our real data. Okay. Now, so let me kind of give you a comparison, comparison about this NHST and this OOM. The statement with the red crosses in the front are null-hypothesis significant testing, but we focus on what OOM is. So I was slow when I talk about this, I will try to slow down and help you understand each by each statement. But there are also some, statistical and logic behind the OOM, but we will not go that far today. So OOM is trying to create explanatory models of our natural system. That's our data, what you collected, and not doing estimation. So OOM tells you how many observations in my study are consistent with my theoretical explanation. So it is not about what is the probability of obtaining a test statistic. Also, OOM takes each data set on an as-is basis. It is not making measurement assumption. And then OOM is person-centered and explanatory. It is not inference to population parameters. OM is based on the basis of the similarities between the structures of observation, not a particular function relating to two or more variables. So vice versa, if your study purposes is to infer the population, to predict, to seek functions among variables, then null hypothesis significant testing may be still your friend. But now we commonly use our own data that just want to know what's going on with our students. I feel that this approach is more practical and more useful for decision making. Okay. Like other analysis, we will rely on some metrics to tell us our results. In OOM, here are some key metrics we should know. The first one is PCC, percent correct classification. To put this in a simply way to understand it is the percentage of participants whose responses match expectation. So that means we will need to set up expectation and compare our results. And later Vince will share how we set up our expectation in our data. And if you are familiar with the effect size, which is now required to report it for many peer review articles, you can consider PCC is your person-centered effect size. So you can do that too. The next one is the CSI. I have the range here. It measures the degree to which values from the target and rotated matrix match. We will have some resources about what does this literally mean in statistic and math. So you can, if you are interested in learning more, you will be able to learn from those resources. And then C-value is a chance of achieving the ordered observation PCC randomly. The last statement here is, if you would like me, so every time when you see the output, you got the results and then have the question, so what? They have this statement, if your PCC of 0.50, that is 50% or greater, combined with a model C-value of less than 0.1, this you can see is generally considered significant. If you still want to have this significant concept in your results to communicate with others. So in OOM software, all this information, once you have imported your data, those numbers is just shared in the output screen and a graph. Okay, these are the 7 principles that I copy from the book, the creator of the OM creator of some statisticians, they have this 7 principle. The primacy of the real, looking the data as it is, the primacy of observation, aggregation often leads to obfuscation. Outliers are people too, don't sacrifice them. Think through the lens of an integrated model, estimate population parameters in their proper limited role. So we can take questions later, but the next slide, I want Dr. Nix start to, really apply it to our own data, and you probably will have some of your questions answered. Dr. Nix, here.
Thank you, Dr. Wu. Great job. I hope you have unscared everybody. That was very clear. So thank you for starting us out that way. And so first of all, I want to discuss the courses a little bit in case you have not been a participant in the massive online open course MOOC that's offered every spring by SAAL free of charge. It's an 8-week self-paced course, really. And you have, I think, from February to May, something like that, to complete an 8-module course. So the reason I'm bringing that up is there's an opportunity to get in on the data analysis annually for this project. Sarah and I have been working with 6 years of data just in a couple of outcome perspectives. So we're using, just briefly, the GWALS, Griffith University Affective Learning Scale. And it's an ordinal scale output from 1 to 7. And the way we coded those, it's deductive coding, qualitative content analysis, basically. We match the reflections of the students to the levels on that instrument. And so as far as psychometrically validated means anything, this scale has been through the steps. We always have 2 coders with every year of students, and sometimes we had 4 and 5, but we also have 1 person who randomly I will send 50 reflections to, like every 100 take 50, every 20 take 50 more. And that third person, if we had 2 coders, gives us another reliability check. And over 5 years and 2 research projects, I don't know, maybe 13,000 cases, we've got a 0.91 intercoder reliability using this scale. So if you're interested in something to assess affective learning in students, I recommend you look this up. Dr. Rogers is very helpful. He offered us to use it. You have to do a non-disclosure agreement. It's not publicly open, but he will let you use it in your research as long as you sign that agreement. So every year, students were asked to reflect on 3 different units of this MOOC. And we did not require any of those. So that's why this is a good example of how missing data can throw you off, but also OOM is built to handle this. The reflections were optional, but I'll tell you, back to the opportunities, if I didn't focus on anything else for 10 years except the discussion boards, which nobody has analyzed yet, the discussion boards in this class would keep me busy with a research agenda for 10 years if I was a qualitative researcher. So, and then there's quantitative opportunities too. Time on task. Did you watch a complete video? All of this stuff is in there, and it's soon going to be 8 years of data. So if you want some practice, I guarantee you the instructors as a team would be glad for you to get this experience and help. You see Dr. Joe Levy's report every year. It's like 90 pages, but it's still surface level compared to what could be done with this data. And that's not a knock on Joe. Joe's a busy, and there's a volunteer stuff that he does, right? Coming up with a 90-page report is super impressive to me. But of the people who responded as a reflection, 327 of those, almost 24%, 23.5%, successfully earned their certificate in the student affairs assessment. And so, again, 6 years worth of data were analyzed. I could talk about this forever. It's a platinum mine. It's a uranium mine, but thank you for advancing. Sarah knows what I want to do next. So these are the people who signed up, and see, only about 9% were from outside North America. And that's only a bit. It's a tiny bit, actually. Non-binary people who identified as non-binary, that's a super small group of people. Same with people who didn't want to disclose their genders. But it turns out that that's one of the most interesting findings of all of these reflections. We'll get to in just a little bit. And those missing values there, you see they're tantalizingly close for each column, but it's not the same people. It's just ironic that it turned out that way. But sometimes it wasn't the case that one person had all three missing values. So they staggered. It was just interesting that we have something like that. Next, please. And so we mentioned earlier, Sarah did, there were 8 weeks of activities in the MOOC. And so 7 weeks included a quiz at the end of the unit. And as we see here, the maximum column in the end they were scored differently with respect to perfect scores. Students had to earn, though, I think it was 80% on each quiz and then an 80% overall, or it was 75% on each quiz and then 80% overall. I don't remember. It didn't change, but I just don't remember what the quiz value was for success. But you had to get all of them at that level, and then overall, your average had to be an 80% of the total score you could have earned. And so these were our 7 of our outcome variables for the quantitative analysis. They're relatively interval-y and kind of ratio-ish scales, but the data were nowhere near normally distributed. As Dr. Wu talked about earlier, it failed the fat pencil test royally. And so we'd expect a non-parametric test in this case to be more accurate than any parametric test, according to measurement theory. Next, please, Sarah. And so this Griffith University Affective Learning Scale, or GWALS as I call it, was used to assess students' affective learning achievement levels based on those unit reflections, qualitative reflections. What did I learn this week? How did I put what I learned into practice on my job? And so a quick note here, I've been using this scale, as I said, for 5 years and probably 13,000 cases. I've analyzed over 5,000 of those. We have, my project teams and we think this is a better measure of instructor skills than anything else. So if you're assessing affective learning outcomes and blaming the student, that might not be deep enough. You might not be going as deep as you think you are. I really recommend looking into that a little bit and perhaps exploring this scale. It's an ordinal scale, though. And so we'd expect non-parametric statistics to be more accurate according to measurement theory again. And for people who are not entirely familiar with non-parametrics, we focus on medians and interquartile ranges rather than the means and the standard deviations. We use variation rather than variance when we describe the ranges. And then a side note on this IQR, the last column, interquartile range. If we have a 0, we pretty much think we have achieved consensus, total agreement, right, amongst whatever people are rating or evaluating, or if we're looking at attitudes. An IQR of 0 means consensus was achieved. If you do a Delphi study, that's kind of what we use there. But so we can't say that we had total consensus of that score on the GWALS scale, but we can, on the GWALS score, but we can look at that median and say, that's really high. And I want to give a shout out to the instructors of the MOOC, because my various research teams looking at this, we have definitely validated that any GWALS score overall of 4.0, a median of 4.0 or up, indicates a mindset shift. And so we can be fairly confident that the MOOC is shifting mindsets across 6 years of data. So I wanted to just say that for the instructors, and thank you for them. Thank you, Sarah. Next one. So here we're reflecting on what we've already talked about. You can see the significance levels. Again, we're showing these not because we believe in p-values, but this is traditionally what people have been taught to use. And so we're showing these as comparisons on you see the variable on the first column, the tests we conducted. The top one's the non-parametric. The second one is the parametric test, the statistics that resulted from that. And for those of you who are not real familiar with that, the H statistic is an approximation of chi-square, but it's using ranked values. And then we see that p-value. And then over here, we did effect size estimates. And it's important, right? As Dr. Wu mentioned earlier, more and more journals are requiring that we talk about effect sizes. So it's important that we choose the right one for the data we're using. So we used eta square as an estimate for the non-parametric data, and we used the Cohen's d as for the independent t-tests. And so you can see most of the non-parametric tests had lower effect sizes than the parametric test. And that's because none of this data was normal, right? It was a skewed distribution. That's why we say, okay, let's use non-parametrics for these things. But OOM goes a little bit step further. And gender played no role in any of these outcomes on the modules, just to be clear. It did for other things, but not here. Please, next. And so some of our subgroups had n's lower than 5. For the gender case, the non-binary subgroup had only 2 participants, and there were only 3 in the subset who chose not to disclose their gender. And when you got such a small n, an ANOVA would have invariably missed the statistical significance of Wall score versus gender. The Kruskal-Wallis, though, is a non-parametric test. It's comparable to the ANOVA. It uses ranked data in place of raw data. And so it tests whether a random observation from each group is equally likely to be above or below a random observation from another group. And since the Kruskal-Wallis theoretically is distribution free, it's understandable that its results might show significance where an ANOVA would not. And that's illustrated quite well on this slide here. Thank you, Sarah. And so remember, Dr. Wu told us about the critical values, the metrics that we need to talk about, the percent correct classifications, the model C value, and that's what we got listed here. When we're conducting observation-oriented modeling, we use the menu commands, and this is a free software. Dr. James Grice developed this. It's a complex software. It has many more advanced functions than we're showing you today, and I wish everyone here that joined us could check out Dr. Grice's work. He's at Oklahoma State University. It's fascinating software written from a scientific realism perspective, from a fascinating mind. And so I just want you to, I mean, he knows his psychometrics. That's why he developed this, right? He's trained. So this is really awesome if you just take the time to get into it. But the important thing to remember, as Dr. Wu said earlier, we need a percent correct classification of 0.5 or higher, 50%, coupled with a model C value of 0.1 or lower. Both of those things have to be present in all the journals that use OOM. That's what researchers have agreed shows us something is significant when we have both of those, 50% and a model C value of 0.1 or less. And so remember, this software compares literal persons against persons. Our results here, you see nothing on this page is significant. We don't have a 50% PCC and a 0.1 or less model C value at any of these. However, reflect back on the non-parametric and parametric results, they all showed some sort of significance with these, right? Now, I have to qualify that by saying, if I am an instructor and I think it's okay that 31, let's look at module 4, 27.5% of my non-native English speakers are going to score lower on that specific test every year out of 6 years. If I'm okay with that, it's not statistically significant. But here's the difference in what OOM does. It lets us see exactly what percent of the students were doing what on every outcome. And so if, as an instructor, that is concerning, I don't need to worry about whether or not it's significantly statistic for a journal. Is it okay that that's what my class is doing? And so I just want to put that out to you. That's what we learn when we look at OOM, the real values. It's not an estimate. And so some of those other ones had moderate effect sizes too, remember? And so we used the quick note about the first column. We used the command from the menu, ordered analysis, ordered observations, and then crossed orderings. And that's what you're going to use most of the time. If you start using this software and use it for learning outcomes assessment, those will be basically the 2 commands you want to use. And then we'll show you some outputs and one other command that you might want to explore. But I would recommend you start with those and play with your data and then dig deeper into the software. Okay, thank you, Sarah. So from the previous slide, we had two groups, right? And so the tests and the results and pairwise comparisons, whatever, they were much simpler. However, for Gual score versus gender, we had several groups. Now we've listed those first groups here just as a reminder and so sort of a reference value. But we used the same commands on the menu, ordered observations, and then crossed orderings. And for the first row, we used the, I haven't said this yet. We used the results from those parametric and non-parametric tests to predict what we expected. So we have to say what our expected outcome is. They're sort of like a hypothesis, right? So we use those results to say, okay, that's what we're going to expect here. And so we thought that non-binary folks would achieve higher Gual scores than every other group in every single comparison if we based it on what our parametric and non-parametric traditional tests showed us. But evidently that's not the case, right? Remember, we'd need a 0.5, 50%, but we only see 45%. That main Gual score there versus gender, where it says everybody, non-binary, non-disclosed, men, women, everybody. Non-binary is greater than all of those groups, non-disclosed men and women, and greater than men and non-disclosed, all that. The total percent correct classifications were 45, almost 45.5%. Our model C value was good, but we didn't quite achieve the 50%. However, when we start to look at the comparisons with the non-binary against the non-disclosed, with the non-binary against the men, with the non-binary against the women, you see those percent correct calculations jump really high. And so that's another advantage of OOM. When you see something like that, you can then dig deeper and reanalyze only those groups against each other and see exactly what that meant. I want to share a quote. Sarah and I and Dr. Levy and another researcher, Dr. Song, have a manuscript under review. And so you see, first of all, despite having a small n, we were still able to compare 310 pairs of observations in the cases of men and 855 pairs of observations in the cases of women. This is possible because we're comparing person against person on every single opportunity instead of using aggregates. And one of the things we said in our manuscript is assessment professionals should always keep in mind the ultimate goal is to improve the lives of individuals, and not let ourselves be distracted by an abstract, theoretical, average student. Breaking free of the focus on averages and examining instead the variations with and across persons recognizes that an outlier is still important as a human, and it should not be sacrificed for data homogeneity. Okay, next one, I think, Sarah, this is where I get to start having some little bit of fun. This is what an output looks like. So we said we're going to show you, we tried to put things in tables because people are familiar with tables, but when you're using OOM and you say, I want to do a crossed orderings analysis, this is what it's going to look like on your screen. And it's going to give you all that data. And we can dig into that in Q&A if you want to, but there are 3 sections of data in this output report that explains kind of what the heck's going on. This first section we see on this slide is describing the orderings. It gives us frequency summaries. It shows us our predefined pattern. You see, we base that on the results from the NHST tests. Or the defined pattern, another way to think about that is it's our hypothesized expectations, right? What we guessed would happen. And then we see down on the bottom the results. And you see how many correct. And next slide, please. So the middle of the output shows you, it breaks down the randomized results. And you can choose as many randomized trials as you want to run. That uses deep structures and Procustis rotations, I forgot how to say that word, in an algebraic matrix. We don't have to know that, but that's what the software does. And we can show you a slide later if you're interested, but it automatically does that and randomizes observations against observations. So you can be pretty sure if you do randomization, it's like bootstrapping, right? But it's every person against every person and then randomly switching those. And so that's what it shows you, how many times it did that, what percent was correct, the model C value. Next, please. And then the final part of an output, the third section, it actually lists every pairwise comparison of the groups. And remember, this is not pairwise comparisons of means or medians. This is pairwise comparisons of groups. So for those of you who do post hoc ANOVAs, Tukey's, or SUA-MBC, MCB, this is similar, except here we're using actual person against person every possible chance. And so you can see how each one turns out, and then the which ones have a C-value of 0.5 or 0.1 or less, and the percent correct classification of 50% or more. And you see there's a couple of them that do. All right, and so next slide, please. This is what Dr. Wu mentioned earlier about a multigram printout. A multigram is basically a multi-unit frequency histogram. And so what I wanted to do for this example is I created new list of orderings, what you would traditionally you would say I recoded into new variables. And so gender plus means I'm only looking at women and non-binaries, people who identified as women, people who identified as non-binary. I separated those out. Gender plus is just recoded. I'm only using the two groups, men versus non-binary. And then gender plus, I only use non-binary against prefer not to disclose. And what we see on these, what we want to see is those teal colored blocks. That means, well, if our hypothesis is good, that's what we want to see. This means that many values correctly conformed with what we expected. Non-binary people who identified as non-binary generally had higher GWAL scores than people who identified as women. The only incorrect observations were people who had characterization as their top level. Some of those were women when compared with every non-binary every time. But it's not very often that we saw that. Same thing over in men, right? 91% of the time of those 67 observations were correctly classified. Then you go down to the end, 87.5 just happens to be the same as it was for women, but we had 8 observations and those were correctly plotted. And so when you get the printouts that accompany these, you get a lot of information, and it's really way too much to delve into that for this presentation, but you can get printouts that explain. And if you're using the software, like most of you use, if you hold your mouse over one of those bars, it's going to give you all the statistics and say, what's inside here? What are we comparing? Why does this look like this? It'll be a little pop-up menu, but these are screenshots, so it doesn't do that when I move my mouse. Okay, and I think that we are ready for the next slide, right, Sarah? So really, we just wanted to pique your interest, say, hey, look what we've found and are playing with. And Sarah and I got together because of Dr. Jo Levy. She was interested in helping analyze some data. I met her through AALHE, and we started looking at this data set. And so we've got an article under review with all this, but we really wanted to share it with the profession because it's a lot simpler than I probably can make it sound, but it does have a little learning curve. The vocabulary is different. Sarah, do you want to say anything else there?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So I first, of course, bought a book and then trying to learn the concept and the logic behind this statistical analysis. And then there are so many instructional videos that the authors already post on the YouTube. I use my own data and just, followed each step. I pause the video and then look at my own data set and try to make sure that I understand each step, why I need to click this and that. And then I have some results out, outputs, but I made mistakes, like when I import the data, some coding is not correct, that I had a chance to talk with Dr. Nix, and then he explained that to me. So I would say I saw a question about the friendliness of using that software. I would say that definitely in the first trial, I believe there were some mistakes, especially this is not common import data that you use to import it or preparing your data. But the concept is similar. Some terms may be a little bit different. From
Sarah,
what
excuse me, would you advance the slide, please? Because that will answer some of the questions in chat. Then the advance, the next, go the other way. Sorry. Yeah, this one. This is the book. So now go ahead. I'm sorry. I just saw that chat and I thought if that was up while you're talking to be helpful.
Yeah. So these other resources have been going back to look at. Also, you can look what other publications that using their own data and apply OOM to their data. That is also very helpful to understand the concept. For me, I have to understand the concept before I really apply it, put it into the software. And that's my learning experiences.
So I'm going to address a couple of those other questions I saw. Yes, there are people who are putting out R markup languages and scripts that you can use to do the same kinds of things that James has put into his software. So this is free software. It's Windows software, but it runs under emulators just fine. My research partner, Dr. Misty Song, uses it under a Mac. My colleague, Dr. Mark Garrison, uses it under Mac. I use it under Linux, under a VM running Windows under Linux. So it's simple. As Sarah said, you follow along with James's videos on YouTube, have your own data set there. The main thing is when you import and recode, that's the biggest learning curve for me personally, was importing and recoding and understanding that I need to do away with all the labels to start with and then put the labels back in OOM to make sense. Because when you import everything, the way deep structures are going to get analyzed, it'll confuse you because it doesn't care what order. Like if you have a strongly agree to strongly disagree scale, it doesn't care the order. It's going to remember and it's going to randomize them. And you're going to get confused watching that and think, oh my gosh, all my labels are screwed up. Well, they're really not, but they don't have the same numbers assigned to them as you would if you did traditional statistics. So it's better to follow his method and start from scratch and keep some notes and say, okay, I'm just going to add my labels into this software. It will import SPSS labels and stuff. It absolutely will. It just, the way it randomizes and gets ready for deep structures, that was a little bit confusing for me. Not that it was wrong. It's just, it's easier for me to do it the other way. I don't know about Stata, however you want to say that. I don't use that anymore. I have a long time ago, but I know you can do it in R. But I just use this software. It's easy. So did you see any inconsistencies? I didn't. I actually gave us more clarity after we analyzed them in OOM. And I'm actually considering using OOM to analyze, to run themes in qualitative data, to use it for doing deeper analysis of themes. I mean, I know it'd be a quantitative analysis of themes, but I think it would be useful for that in a large scale, like several case studies or a large scale things where we're not in an extensive study where we're trying to generalize, right? In an intensive study, I don't know that I would see the plus of that. Julie, great question. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you see Rebecca Gibbons' question? How would you describe the low code friendliness of the OOM software?
Oh, I think it's really friendly if you follow his videos. But if you don't watch his videos with your data, you will get completely turned around. I got the book too, right? And the book is basically an in-depth manual that accompanies his videos. And so if you follow along in the chapters and the videos with your data, in probably a month, you'd know more than I know, because I have not stayed on it. I use it when I have a student with a data set, that's appropriate. And Sarah and I, when we started looking at this data and how many missing values, I said, hey, I know this thing I've just been learning about. And so I've learned it deeper because Sarah and I have been working on it together, but also I use it when a dissertation product has the data set that calls for that. We teach it in our advanced qualitative analysis course. I mean, advanced quantitative analysis course. I don't teach the advanced course with this one, but I introduce it in the basic course too. But for stakeholders, I'm going to jump down to Julie's question. That is an interesting thing because reviewers of journals don't understand. And if we've had this experience, we've had like reviewer 2, right? Everybody's favorite. We had somebody who loved the article, but then reviewer 2 says, I don't know why you wanted to do this. You shouldn't junk NHST. It's still good enough, blah, 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 blah. And so this was obviously somebody didn't want to change there. So if you've got those types of people that are gatekeeping the journals, that's an issue, right? We can't get past that. So that's why I think it's important to look at all the other papers that have been published. Those are big name people, right? Mm-hmm. We have to take what they've learned into consideration and try to get that into a sort of digestible language for our stakeholders. And I think the multigram, once somebody plays with those and really understands what it means, those are really useful.
And
so as a follow-up to that, Doctor, what would you assess as the state of adoption at major research institutions of this model of statistical analysis at this point? Is this the wave of the future, or is there a hard slog ahead?
Depends on your research paradigm, John. That's a great question. If you're a constructivist or a interpretivist, and that's what you're going to stay in, probably not. If you're a positivist and you're really geared to the NHST and you only care about publish or repairable, no. But this is written from a critical realist or in a scientific realist perspective. And so if that's what you think, and it's unlikely to find that you go into a department where everybody agrees on anything. The reason I've been able to do it is I actually found the position I'm in now because I was looking for a place who would do this kind of research and kind of get away from the positivism slant. And the person who was interviewing me was a good friend with James Grice. And so now I've got to get involved with it. It just happened, happenstance, looking for something, but they're out there. That's why I say, if you look at the publications, you'll see where they are. And it's really also boils down to what you think about measurement, right? Do you buy into measurement scales? Do you think everything can be measured? OOM is distribution free. So it's in that respect, I think it's as good as we can get.
And I would add that some assessment professional or some social scientists that still need to do some work for the institution on the prediction or around regression and understand some variables. So I believe the null-hypothesis testing is valuable and then still, reliable when you run those data. So it really depends on the research purposes that just try to find appropriate methods and use it. I have a little thing about, I want to answer Julie's questions about sharing the result to stakeholders. I actually start to incorporate some results to my GenEd data. And the reason is as I mentioned earlier, sometimes if the data is not significant after disaggregation, the senior leadership won't pay attention to it until it gets significant. But again, when we disaggregate data, some groups N number is so small, and it is very hard to get that label. But if we have some percentage, tell them that more than 50% of our students just meet our expectation. It's lower, continue to have lower performance comparing to others. Then the conversation can be there. So yeah, I won't give up another one because that is still very mutual understandable methods that people understand and I understand. But I will start to incorporate some other results to help people understand our existing data set.
Those are great points, Sarah. And that really makes me reflect on my answer. It really ought to be at your level, right? So when I started using this, everything I used it for was a post hoc test. I was still running the I'm a niche non-parametric guy. So I was still running all my non-parametric tests, looking at the p-values, the effect sizes, and then I was using OOM as a post hoc analysis tool. The deeper I got, the more I realized there are some analyses in there. Like there's one article out there that says a simple alternative to logistic regression. That's a really neat article to read. And I helped one of my students do that kind of analysis on a dissertation product alongside the logistic regression, so we could explain what it was. And I think it's important, as Sarah said, to continue alongside until you see, oh, well, now I might not need that. But the comfort level is the main thing, right? And who you're presenting to. If they don't know what this means, you're probably wasting your time switching over to this completely, just like Sarah said. Great points, Sarah. Thank you for making me reflect on that.
Thank you. We have just a few minutes left. Are there any final questions for Dr. Nix and Dr. Wu? All right. Well, as we conclude today's session, again, our thanks to Drs. Wu and Nix and the SAAL Professional Learning and Development Committee for their help in bringing this conversation today. This has been extremely fascinating. A recording of our structured conversation and associated materials, along with a link to provide feedback, will be shared with you via email for all of our attendees, and will also be available on our website. So please join us in January, if you are able, for our next structured conversation with Joseph Levy, as we discuss the pre-open course. And we hope that some of you who are with us today will be joining us as presenters in the future. You can remember that you can submit your proposal by visiting our website. The proposal form also includes instructions on who to contact if you want to have a preliminary chat about submitting that idea. Thank you again to Dr. Nix and Dr. Wu, and thank you to everybody for joining us today.